Greetings, sisters and brothers. This is Milton Alimadi, publisher of Black Star News, blackstarnews.com, and adjunct professor of African history at John Jay College here in New York City. This is my coronavirus diary number 5. I must say, I am very happy and pleased by the reaction I got to coronavirus diary number 4. In that discussion, I essentially said Africans are being abused in China, in southern Italy, in North Africa, and in the African diaspora because the value of African life was destroyed during the colonial era, and it continues to be destroyed by misrulers in Africa. So today, in diary number 5, my message is to Africa's youth. When African leaders emerged in the 1950s with a mission, a determined mission to get rid of European colonial rule, many of them were in their 30s or in their 40s. When Ghana became independent, Kwame Nkrumah was 48 years old in 1957. Kenneth Kaunda was 40 years old in 1964 when Zambia became independent. Julius Nyerere was 39 when Tanganyika, which later became Tanzania, became independent. Milton Obote in Uganda was 37 years old in 1962 when Uganda won its independence. And these are just a few examples. Sekou Touré was 36 years old in 1958 when Guinea became independent. Modibo Keita was 45 in Mali. So why am I bringing all this up and their age? I'm bringing this up because those youthful Africans realized Africa was ready for fundamental change. And what they did was they mobilized the masses, and these numbers swelled. So they had all this cohesion, all this energy. And at that time, the European colonial rulers knew it was time to go, and they left. But what happened at that time was the state was not transformed. So those young African leaders inherited the European state, which had been imposed and created in Africa to serve the interest of Europe. Africa became and maintained and remains a source of cheap labor, a source of cheap raw materials. That was the fact during colonial rule, and that is the fact today. So we need to change the state in Africa so that African states address the needs of Africans, not of the former colonial powers and new powers such as China and the United States, which emerged as a power in Africa in the 1960s. After the Europeans were in decline. So we need to change that. And there's no better time than now, sisters and brothers. My message to the youth: if youthful Africans could do it in the 1950s and 1960s and grasp the reins of state powers in Africa, albeit the state was not transformed, nonetheless, it was significant. That was the first hurdle. The hurdle now in front of us is to fundamentally change the state. So I'm urging the youth of Africa. We must remove all the misrulers in Africa so that we can create African nation states whose interests are on behalf of the citizens of African countries, where we use our raw materials not to send it overseas unprocessed, no. Because that is why these industrialized countries continue to become more wealthy. They use our raw materials as fuel for their factories. So let's look at cocoa, for example. If you go to Whole Foods here in New York and you pick up the container, cocoa product of Germany. Does Germany grow cocoa? It's preposterous. That's just one example. We can multiply this across all commodities in Africa. Let's build processing plants in Africa. We create jobs from the cocoa growers to the people that are shipping it to the factories, to the people that are working in the factories. And then when we ship it overseas, they're in containers, not in these big sacks that they pay us pennies for. It's ready to go to the supermarkets in Europe, and we get the maximum price for that. Those are the kind of economies we need to build in Africa. And this also raises the income of these workers in Africa, not overseas. And the youth can do it. We need to have Africa youth movements in every African country, whether African youth movement Uganda, African youth movement Tanzania, African youth movement Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, all over, and let them coordinate these ideas and put it into action. The time for talking is over. After coronavirus COVID-19, we must not allow business as usual in Africa. These individuals that led us to independence in the 1950s and 1960s, before they did, they were never leaders. They were never. They had to learn and teach themselves and become leaders. Let's learn from their mistakes, but let's now grasp the reins of power in Africa so we can stop the exploitation of Africa by the outside world and their agents in Africa. It's sad to say, but many of these misrulers are actually not African presidents, but they serve the roles that the colonial governors used to serve before 1960s. So we need pro-African leaders who are working in the interest of Africans. And the youth can do that. The youth, you are the leaders of today and the leaders of tomorrow for the new Africa that is going to end up being a borderless, united Africa. But start today. No more business as usual in Africa. So that's my message for Coronavirus Diary number 5. Stay strong, stay Pan-African, and stay hopeful because change will happen. And if you want to get in touch with me, mallimadi@gmail.com. MALLIMAD like David, @gmail.com. Let's transform Africa together, united.